Yo, what up, what up, what up? Let's get it popping at some point here. I feel like we're going to have a good show today, especially since I got to, once again, power through this one, guys, because I got things to do. You do too. So we're going to make this one short and sweet. We're going to get to a lot of topics, to be honest with you. I mean, a lot of football today, folks. Lots and lots of football. Actually, didn't even do my weekly NBA update for you guys. That's how much football we're doing today. But we got some other stories. We got a tennis story. I think if you've been paying attention to sports, you know what the tennis story is. It's pretty funny. Right, I forgot. Tweets. The tweets, they're very important. How else am I supposed to get rich and famous? Ignore that. That's from a very heartwarming video, which is irrelevant to the situation. Here we go. I just keep on turning, rolling, rolling, rolling on the river. War Swords podcast. Oh, by the way, explanation for this week's episode name. It is The Wheel of Time. It is from a book series turned TV show that's on Apple TV. And my friend just got an update on some COVID testing thing that's going down in Sugarland. Maybe he'll be able to play in a tournament that we're playing tomorrow. Anyway, other stuff. What was I saying? Oh, explaining the episode name. So it's called The Wheel of Time because in that show, the Wheel of Time is a reference to the very existence of life. And it is the concept that everything eventually gets recycled in life. Legitimately every soul will reappear on Earth in some way, shape, or form. And that actually is a source of the problem that they're trying to solve, but is also a guiding source for how people live their lives in terms of how they deal with death. Because there are people who are just kind of like, yeah, like my daughter died and that's horrible, but I know at some point the wheel of time, whether it be 10 years, 1,000 years, 500 years, or tomorrow, will spit her soul back out into the world. And I dedicate myself to the wheel of time. That's that concept, which is, of course, in relation to sports for the fact that it seems like there are so many things that continuously happen and it almost comes off like we are running the same vicious cycle in certain ways. And actually some things that are a little inspiring that we may be breaking the cycle a little bit more. We may be breaking out of like long held concepts of truth within sports because I think the average sports fan is more intelligible than it was 10 years ago or 15 years ago or even 5 years ago, because we now have a healthy skepticism to a certain degree about reports that we see. And maybe, just maybe, if we stick to it and media members do more and more of the right things, which is calling out the bullshit of even other media members when they are being manipulated by teams and other things like that, maybe, just maybe, we can reach a healthy place where sports, where we do not let our fandom be absolutely controlled by the teams that we root for, where we can all be critical of everything to a certain degree. Yeah. Anyway, that is the source behind this week's episode. We got a new follower, by the way, so shout out to Blitz S20 for following the show while we were offline, which is amazing to find out. I have no idea who you are, but shout out to you. Hopefully you're checking into the show. Yeah. Shout out to you. Welcome to the gang. I don't even really think we're a gang because, we don't have any, initiations whatsoever. Your initiation is to tell this podcast about as many people as you possibly can and to watch it every time it comes out, even the bad episodes. And you know what? I'm not above saying that sometimes I put out shit episodes, guys, and it's not intentional. It's not on purpose. It's just sometimes I'm not on, and that's why I do this show. I'm trying to get more. I'm trying to get to the point where I am very frequently just dropping bangers. I'm trying to get like Lil Jon. Every time I hit the mic, it's just on fire after I get done with it. That's my lifestyle that I'm trying to live. And hopefully, if we do things right long enough, or if I keep doing this show long enough, I will become the ultimate podcaster. That's how it goes, right? Like you just keep doing something long enough and then eventually you get good at it. Even though, I'm terrible at this whole marketing thing, and honestly, I need to. That's my life. Cool, we got our sound check going, and honestly, I just need to get better at telling people that I do a podcast. Even though, like, I feel like everybody in my close circle, they're very aware that I have a podcast and I do it all the time, but I need more random people on the streets to know that I do podcasting. Yesterday, I saw something really cool from this guy named Bru McCoy. I used to work with him at ESPN 97.5, the radio station here in Houston, and he had like his 400th episode of his podcast, and we kind of like he started podcasting during lockdown because he got like let go at his job, which kids, by the way, if you want to hear the reason that Bru McCoy was let go from ESPN 97.5, it is literally because he was one of the few broadcasters there, few radio hosts there that did not have a sponsor connected to his name. Yeah, that's literally the only reason, from my understanding, why he was let go. And that is why my dream of being a radio host changed when I started working in radio. I, for a long time, aspired to be a sports talk radio host, and I thought that was the dream, where you just show up after, checking out sports for like a really long time, checking out sports, reading articles, looking at stories, and having a conversation about sports on air, and then you realize all the stuff that goes into it, and a lot of the connections and a lot of ability, and so many people that I worked with in sports talk radio were on air merely because they generated money, not because of like talent or skill. And luckily for a lot of people who do develop that, who are in sports radio, they have a mixture of both, right? Like they have a mixture of the fact that there are companies that are willing to connect themselves to their name, not necessarily to the station or anything like that. They connect themselves to that person's name. That person connects them to whatever radio station that they go to, and they are able to sign contracts and deals and get ads done on the radio station because of their connection to the radio host. And I don't know if they cut them a deal or anything like that. I've never gotten to that point in radio. There are literally people who have been connected to host for decades, in some cases. But yeah, I honestly, man, I thought it was kind of wild that that's kind of how the game goes, right? And I think that that's a little bit different with the big, like the national networks and stuff like that, because obviously those are people who are potential hosts. Like JT the Brick has been like dominating Fox Sports Radio for a really long time, and honestly one of the best in the game to do it. I used to listen to his show all the time when I was a kid, whether it be when I was, when I couldn't watch TV, and when I couldn't watch TV while I was doing my homework, I used to listen to the sports talk radio. I used to call in sometimes. It was pretty dope. You talk about Amy Lawrence for her After Dark show. Like, she doesn't have. I don't think that's as big of an impact, but like what it takes to get to the national level, to be a part of a national broadcast lineup where, you're on all the affiliates that don't have live programming on during spots like morning drive and drive time and all that kind of stuff like that, and they're just picking up your show. That's a level of skill that you gotta have every single day, because you can't miss. You really can't miss. Anyway, I don't know why I went on that long diatribe. Oh, right, because I was explaining how messed up sports talk radio I believe it is. I get it. Money is how people continue to do anything, and how people stay alive and eat food and have shelter and stuff like that. But I thought that there was a way to overcome the fact that you're not connected to money with talent, and I don't think that is, because you kind of have to be like a salesman at the same time, and I'm sure that factors into every aspect of the sports industry as a whole, but none more so than sports talk radio. And like, as a guy who's been a writer before, I've never been asked to go out there and like try and sell ad space in magazines that I work, or in a magazine that I worked for. So interesting stuff overall. Anyway, I'm gonna try and do these tweets for the podcast, and then we'll get started. If you got some questions or you got anything you want to say beforehand or retroactively, if you leave a comment like after, because I notice a lot of people watch the show after it's already recorded. Very few people are like actually hopping in while it's live and stuff like that. But yeah, if you got anything you want to talk about or address or anything like that on the show, drop it in the chat, man. I will stop pretty much everything that I'm doing unless I'm in the middle of like something that I planned out to be kind of organized or kind of a good idea. But yeah, we'll see. Here we go. Let's go. Wow, man. There we go. Come on. You can do it. Copy and paste. There we go. Paste that there. Switch profiles. Oh, man. I get to play Quidditch tomorrow, and I'm so pumped. Haven't played since, November? Haven't played since we went to New Orleans, man. It feels like all the tournaments are so far apart, even though I play like a tournament a month, which is really a lot for some players. But I like to play as often as possible because I spend so much time working out. It's annoying when you get to do all that time. You do all that time. Like, you spend all that time working out, and then you have to wait a month before you go and actually turn up and do shit, which, yeah. Yeah, so this tournament I'm playing in tomorrow is like a fantasy football draft. This tournament, it's like I'm sorry. This tournament I'm playing in tomorrow is a fantasy tournament. So in Quidditch, it's basically like it's basically like a bunch of players sign up to, they say that they're going to come to this tournament, they're going to play and all this kind of jazz like that. And then they say they're going to play in this tournament, show up and all that kind of jazz. And then 5 people sign up to be general managers of a team. Those general managers, they draft each person that is signed up. And so they draft a team and then they play out the tournament. So we'll see what happens. We'll see how this goes. But yeah, that is interesting to me because I got picked in like the 12th round, which I'm not gonna lie, I was raging out in my mind internally. I was also at the house of one of the general managers that was competing, so she was like talking on the phone to somebody who was like helping her draft or whatever. I was shocked that she didn't ask me to help because I've been playing just as long as the person that she asked for help, and then also I felt like I was drafted very, very low, like super low. Like people were like, "Oh yeah, that's definitely a sleeper pick." And then when I was drafted, because I was like, she was in a Discord with all the general managers, the other general managers who were like in the midst of a draft, so I could hear how they were like picking people and stuff like that. And the person who picked me is a guy I know. He basically was just like, "Oh," he basically was just like, "Yeah, give me Ashton. You know, I'll have somebody who can run through people." And it's just really frustrating because it's like, statistically, on my team that I play for, my regular season team I play for, I'm like the leading scorer, and I also lead my team in assists. So, yeah, I feel very slighted, but yeah, there was a couple of players I was talking to in the midst of the draft, and I was like, this is insane, because there were people who were drafted over me who are less experienced. Like, they literally are people who just started playing, and they're like, oh, they're more athletic, and I was like, I feel like I'm pretty athletic, and I'm stronger than, like, all the people you're talking about. Anyway, there's, like, literally people on a hit list at this point, so, sorry about that. You're probably going to get embarrassed tomorrow. So, and I haven't made up my mind if I'm going to be an absolute dick to every person that didn't draft me. Because there, like I said before, there are people who like factually, like pound for pound, and I say pound for pound knowing that I have the most pound for pound are not better players than me that got selected above me, and it was not, I don't say kind of, I mean, like, it was absolutely astounding. When that person's name got selected, I was like, you have to be kidding me. But, you know, no offense. They're all nice people and stuff like that, but I train harder, and I'm a better athlete overall, and they somehow were selected over me. But there's people who are like, yeah, you know, somehow, like, sometimes people have, like, their biases on their teammates and all that kind of stuff like that. And I'm like, I see that's why those players get a shit ton of time on the field, and I find that hilarious sometimes because, like, there will be a lot of players who are significantly better that don't get time on the field, and then there are players who clearly have earned it, who do not. So, yeah. So, yeah. Ooh. Damn. That's a rough one. No Clyde for the, if you want to talk about, no Clyde for the Kansas City Chiefs, ladies and gents. No Clyde the Glide. It's been rough for Clyde Edwards-Helaire ever since he got to the NFL. Like, he dominated college football and didn't miss a game. Now he's like hurt every other week. It fucking sucks, dude. DC Comics is trending for some reason. Hopefully not something. Oh, new I guess Flashpoint is back this year. That'll be interesting. Proud Family's trending. I like that. When does it drop? Oh, it's dropping February 23rd. Let's go. I want to replace my nerd shit now. I want to replace my nerd news. Proud Family, February 23rd. During Black History Month. Yeah. Anyway, here we go. Let's get it popping. We got some bots in the chat. What's up, guys? By the way, if you are... See, there's no translate button. I wish there was like an instant translate to be like, hey, guess what? I'm going to need you to translate that bot language. I did say that I will talk about anything in the realm of sports. So... hopefully they didn't think I could talk about anything in the realm of sports in not English. Sorry. I am the most American of the Americans. I barely speak Spanish, guys. And I barely speak English in many cases. Alright, let's get it popping. Going live. 3, 2, 1. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and everybody else in between, I'm Ashton Gene Lewis. This is the Broke Boy Sports Podcast. To be more specific, this is episode 175 of this here program. Don't know how we made it this far, but I'm very thankful we're here. We got a shit ton of stuff to talk about for sports today. A lot of football, as you can imagine, as the playoffs are just around the corner. I would be remiss if I didn't tell you how to find me in other places other than YouTube and Twitch, which is the way that you're watching me right now. If you're watching live on YouTube and Twitch at Broke Boy Sports on both of those platforms. Shout out to our newest follower, Blitz20, who followed 17 hours ago when we were offline. So that's clutch. Love to see that offline action. I mean, somebody's maybe we're getting this thing called reach within the realm of sports and things. But we have a ton of stuff to talk about. We got nerd news. We got best of the best. We got 2 hydration breaks. So if you need to, find yourself, it is a little bit earlier in the day. It's 1:30. I'm trying to do my podcast earlier in the day so that I can actually do whatever I want at night, because there's typically, when we do the Friday show, I start at like 7 o'clock or whatever, and then I'm late to the thing that I do every single Friday, which is go hang out with my girlfriend at her place, and she gets sometimes she gets upset because I objectively show up too fucking late. Anyway, we're trying to mitigate that by doing stuff now and doing stuff early so that we can move on. Trying to figure out how to do this whole become a famous podcaster and have like a real life kind of deal or whatever. Shout out to everybody who's checking out on YouTube and on Twitch. We got nerd news, we got best of the best, worst of the worst. We do have both of the hydration breaks, like I said before. So if you it is Friday, you want to get a little loose in the office, you get yourself some brown or possibly clear alcoholic beverages. I'm not here to judge. I'm actually here to support. Hydration is not a laughing matter, and I support all forms of hydration. Sometimes you gotta hydrate your soul. Sometimes you gotta hydrate your body. And I have water off in the distance, but I have coffee right next to me because I've been up since 8 o'clock this morning, and I know that's not early for a lot of you, but I tend to work later into the night, so I didn't get home until about 2 a.m. And that was like get home. I didn't get to like sleep until like 3 a.m. or whatever. And I spent time contemplating whether or not I should start planning for the show last night. And I'm very glad that I didn't, because some stuff broke this morning that I wouldn't have got to if I had like planned last night and then let myself wake up at like 10 o'clock or whatever. We also got We Talking Money or We Talking Money. And then, of course, we are going to talk about every single game in the NFL playoffs. We're going to break it all down, talk about it, chop it up. And you can join us in doing that if you want to write in the chat on Twitch and or on YouTube. Drop some information for me. I'm kidding. Don't drop information for me. I am all-knowing when it comes to sports in general. I also do a really good job, and I know this is weird. I do a really good job of like not planning the show or not starting the show when news breaks. I don't think news has ever broken while the show has been going live, and I find that very impressive about myself. And I think maybe, just maybe, that's a sign. Who knows? Anyway, we got some Russian bots in the chat on YouTube. If you want to help me get rid of those comments, hop in there and tell me what you think on literally anything. We can actually talk about like things that are not sports, but we're not popular enough to do that yet because we don't really have a ton of people who watch the show live, and I'm working on that personally. I really am, and the only way to get people to watch the show live is to be consistent. Something that I struggle with in terms of time, not just in life in general or whatever, but something I struggle with in terms of time. But nonetheless, ladies and gents, let's get to it. Let's get into it. We start off the show, as we always do, with nerd news. You guessed it. Somehow this involves racism. Anyway, this is No Nice Things is the subtitle of Nerd News today, because it is in reference to something that I heard on Fat Man Beyond It and did some more research earlier this morning. There is a new Punisher logo. If you are watching the show via Twitch or YouTube, you can see this right now, but it is basically an X that creates the skull behind it. So it's like if you took the regular Punisher skull and you put like a elongated X, and then the top, the X part becomes like the eyebrows of the skull, and then they continue up to make the horns that are slightly above it, and then the other part goes down and it kind of makes like a little goatee that goes in between the teeth part of the skull kind of deal. Anyway, this is for a flurry of reasons. Some of you probably are very familiar with it but did not know it affected the comic book in such a manner. Some of you see it all the time. I live in Texas, so I do see this all the time, and I'll explain what I'm talking about here in a second as soon as I kind of like think about where we're going to start this off. I got a lot of stuff written down about this topic, but I guess we should start off by talking about like why the Punisher is getting a new logo, quote unquote new logo. The Punisher is starting up a new series. So if you're actually a fan of The Punisher, if you like the TV show that was on Netflix, which was very, very good, but if you are also just a fan of The Punisher, like back in the day when they first started doing the comic or any run during the comic, they are starting a whole new run. It is supposed to be the definitive history or like the premiere story of Frank Castle as The Punisher. And it seems like the best time possible to sign up to become a Punisher fan, because it looks like they're probably going to base everything that happens from this point on off of this story, and it kind of is like a modern rewriting of the history. It's 13 extra large comic books, so if you're familiar with comic book sizes, you've probably gotten a couple of those, but it just feels a little bit thicker, and I'm assuming the artwork is going to be pretty amazing, just because that's kind of how comics are. Like, I'm not an art snob, so for like most of my life, anytime I see somebody who can draw something that looks relatively close to a human face, I'm astounded by it. But based off of this little snippet that I got here on the video clip as well, I find the artwork is probably going to look pretty dope. But yeah, they're doing that. The new history that is going to be for Frank Castle is also associated with the new Punisher logo. I don't know if they're going to like take the old Punisher logo and then change it up for some different way or reason or whatever it may be. But what has been done by Marvel is that they've chosen to go in a different way in terms of the logo. There's two different reasons apparently for this, according to Fat Man Beyond, where I originally heard this story. There is a copyright situation where the logo looks too much like a regular Punisher skull, or just like a regular skull drawing that a person would make, so they can't actually copyright something that is considered to be common possession of the world around us and everything like that. And that kind of makes sense. I can get down with that, but nonetheless, that plus the fact that if you pay attention to like the world in general, cops, military, just regular people who have guns have taken the Punisher logo and made it like their insignia for some strange, weird ass reason, where they think that they are the Punisher when it's all said and done in terms of like the grand scheme of things, where it literally just takes reading like the first maybe 4 stories, or just like the general history of Frank Castle, who is the Punisher, the character that the Punisher, his primary name. If you just read like his general story, like there's none of you are the Punisher. Sorry to break it to you. A lot of people who you would definitely put into the category of potentially white supremacists. There are people who, and it begs the question of like, why are cops okay with that kind of being something that they've co-opted and added to? You know, there's a ton of it, where there's a ton of examples where you can like find stickers, posters, t-shirts where they have like the thin blue line, or they have like the Punisher skull and it's bleeding, like the little runny part where the teeth are at, like one of them is blue, one of them is red, all that kind of stuff like that. It also is a interesting take on what you think vigilanteism is. And also don't know why cops would want to support vigilante justice, because, it's against the law, but whatever. We all know like what the underlying force of that idea is, right? It's an attempt to create fear and scare people, right? It's an attempt to make it seem like you're a hero, and it is also received as a sign of a police state where cops get to do whatever they want, and by any means necessary they will stop crime kind of deal. And that is how you see the descent of a society, which some people believe is already going on in America. I am not one of those people. Maybe it's because I have a little too much faith in humanity, and also because we see things, there are people calling those things out. There may not be actions taken or heavy enough actions taken, but there are people who are seeing the things that are wrong and calling them out. When we get to the point where there are people who are more invested in trying to ignore things like cops co-opting a Marvel superheroes logo in a clear attempt to intimidate people on a regular basis, same thing with military members, to try and pretend that they are one of these characters and think that they have like the righteous and just reasoning to attack behind this, is when we kind of lose it. So yeah, but the Marvel as a whole, the big thing that they're taking away from this is definitely, this is also a big sign that something really cool could be happening, in the sense that the Punisher may be getting ready to make its way, the character Frank Castle. Don't know if they're going to stick with Bernthal or anything like that, who was the original actor in not the movie, the old Punisher movie, which was really dope back in like 2008, but the actual Netflix TV show. And I enjoyed that one quite a bit. It was the last one to come out, and it was when everybody found out that none of the Netflix shows were going to make their way into the MCU, and I think that kind of killed a lot of the attractiveness to those shows in some way, shape, or form. But a lot of people really enjoyed his version of the Punisher and the story that was being told with him. But nonetheless, I think that this is a sign, especially since obviously, if the Punisher does make his appearance in the MCU in a major way, they would have to make merch that is just like they make it for Black Widow, Hawkeye, everybody else that's involved in the Avengers or any superhero. Black Panther, they have to make merch, and I don't think Disney as a company would feel comfortable with taking their old Punisher logo, which is now, like we mentioned before, been co-opted, very similar to Betsy Ross's 13 Colonies flag that was originally going to be on a Nike shoe, I think for like a 4th of July release or something like that, and Colin Kaepernick called it out that it is a flag that is supported heavily by white supremacists and has been co-opted by them as like a sign of the kind of America that they want. Specifically, you can go look it up. I'm not here to educate you on like the dominance of white supremacy or whatever. But nonetheless, if the Punisher is going to make his appearance in the MCU, they need to get away from the thing that has clearly been taken by a group of people and warped into something else that it is not intended to be. And on top of that, Kevin Smith on the Fat Man Beyond, which is a podcast I suggest you listen to if you're a big comic book nerd kind of fan, not because of Kevin Smith, but mainly because of Mark Bernardin, who I enjoy hearing his thoughts so very much. Kevin Smith is a nerd, and that is a genuine location and place to be as a person, and I enjoy that part about him. But like Mark Bernardin is a fan of like storytelling, and you can hear that in the way that he talks about what he looks for in a show, things that he doesn't like about a show, things that he does like about a show, things that break the typical formula and all that kind of stuff like that. But yeah, that's my 15-second plug for Fat Man Beyond. Anyway, they pointed this story out to me and I thought it was interesting. I went and looked it up, and it was directly correlated to the fact that a bunch of people who are typically conservative and typically big fans of the Second Amendment, which I don't have a problem with, but I do have a problem when people try and make gun culture like a religion, which to some people it is, because they think that guns are far more important than the actual lives that guns can take. And it's very evident in the way that certain group of people talk. Anyway, moving on, other stuff. We are moving on from nerd news and we're going to best of the best. Sorry, I'm trying to look at like 17 programs at one time. We're going to best of the best. This is actually kind of sad, but I saw like a little golden line, not even a silver lining, a golden lining, ladies and gentlemen. Here we go. Best of the best. Golden parachute. Dave Culley has been fired by the Houston Texans. He is after one season, by the way. So, when I see a coach fired after one season in the NFL, and everybody can attest to this, and this is actually something I was referencing to if you were here before the stream started, I was referencing when I described what the title of the show was about this week in terms of the Wheel of Time, where there are these series of things that we consistently, as sports fans and as media members to a certain degree, I'm not calling myself a media member, but media members consistently fall into this same trap, this same ploy, when they see something that happens and they see a ton of people talking about, wow, that's really weird that happened, or wow, that's super wrong that happened. There's this group of people who feel like they have to find a way to justify what happened. There is very obviously, instead of like blatantly pointing out like what is wrong with the situation. So Dave Culley was fired after one season. Typically, you don't get fired after one season. You don't get fired after one season because there's a couple of things that have to go horribly wrong for a organization to think that what the Texans are basically saying, and for an organization to think that they have higher expectations than what you produced out of it, and then on top of that, for them to question the quality and your abilities as a coach, right? Dave Culley, obviously former we talked about this on the show before, wide receiver assistant for the Baltimore Ravens, turned into head coach for the Houston Texans, which is fantastic. And it was an opportunity for a guy who had been plugging away for a really long time in the NFL and had been associated with a prominent playoff team, right, with the Baltimore Ravens. To argue that Dave Culley should be fired after one season is telling on yourself on a high level, because the expectation for the Texans was definitely not the number of wins that they got this season, which if people, you can ask fans, if the Texans got one win this season, they would not have been surprised. If the Texans went winless this season, would not have been surprised. And for them to be able to squeak out multiple wins this year and one of them against a playoff hopeful, don't forget that they ruined the playoff hopes of the San Diego Chargers. They did get shut out this season by the Colts. They only scored 3 points in total in the 2 games that they played against the Colts this season. They beat the Jaguars both of the times that they played them. They beat the Chargers. There's a lot of highlights that came from there's a lot of successful points and highlights that came from this season. And for people to try and deny that and pretend that that's not the case is disingenuous for what the Texans are. They are not. They were a team that a lot of people were projecting to fall off a cliff, not only because of Deshaun Watson, but because of these series of other things that have arisen since then. The personnel decisions, the letting your head coach become your general manager and then trading away one of the best wide receivers in the NFL, combine that with a lot of the other drafting decisions that were made at the general manager level. And then, of course, all of us finding out recently, within like 3 years ago, essentially, that the team is run by a youth pastor and people in charge of the Texans thinking that that is a good idea. So, this whole situation has been sketchy from the beginning, and of course, when you look back at it in history, when there are people who have no context for what the Texans were, not only this season but what led up to this situation, they're going to look at Dave Culley and they're going to be like, well, look, they fell off a cliff when that guy took over. They're gonna, that's just how it goes. And this vicious cycle, the thing that I was referencing to when I mentioned the wheel of time, Dave Culley is one of many black men who have fallen victim and fallen prey to this the oldest trick in the book to garner points and try and prove that the NFL is fair and that everybody gets a fair shake of it and everybody gets a chance at doing whatever they want to do and anybody can become a head coach kind of deal, to the kind of deception that goes within proving that the Rooney Rule is highly effective at creating opportunities for coaches. They will hire a black coach to a team that is absolutely off the rails. A team that is devoid of Super Bowl caliber talent, playoff caliber talent, a team that is devoid of talent that can win week in and week out in the NFL. And this happens multitudes of times, right? We can talk about endless amounts of examples, and this happens at the college level as well. But this is something that has been a tried and true formula that everybody tries to pretend that they don't see. It just it's happening. By the way, it's happening in 2 different teams in Houston. So it's happening to Steven Silas with the Houston Rockets after why am I blanking on his name? Wow. After the former Houston Rockets head coach, who's now the assistant for the Brooklyn Nets. Yeah, I know his current job, but I forget his name off the top of my head. Anyway, that's happening with Steven Silas. Steven Silas is currently in the midst of a full-on, quote-unquote, rebuild. He's taking the hits to his credibility, to his record, to people questioning his ability to coach, despite the fact that the Rockets have shown on many occasions that they are not focused on winning via free agency, which has been the thing that has kept this team afloat for the past 5 years, since that one time that they got one hamstring pull away from going to the Western Conference Finals and facing off against probably the weakest Cavaliers team that LeBron's had since his time when he first played for the Cavaliers, right? That being said, there are a lot of articles calling out the Texans on their bullshit. There's a lot of articles on the Houston Chronicle. Didn't see who wrote them or whatever, but I read a couple of articles, saw headlines from multiple national networks. There's an article on ESPN about how Dave Culley was set up by the Houston Texans, and I love it. Best of the best is not that situation where people are not falling for the same track that we've fallen for decades within the realm of sports, right? Where we don't talk about how black coaches just so happen to always get an opportunity when things are off the fucking rails for one of these teams. And when things start to look even just a hair better than they can possibly do, they're the first person out the door. That happens all the time. Like, watch the Rockets. If the Rockets ever get back to winning their winning ways, Steven Silas is about to get kicked out the front door. And they're gonna put up a stupid post like the Houston Texans did today, where they're like, "Thank you, Dave Culley, for all your time here you spent with the Texans." Right? Luckily for Dave Culley, and this is the best of the best part, he taking $22 million with him out the door because the Texans fired a guy that they signed to a 5-year contract, and the salary is fully guaranteed. I'm very thankful that he's going to get something out of this because, one, he doesn't deserve the treatment that he got from the Houston Texans, and also he doesn't deserve the punishment that is to coach the Houston Texans right now, where the power dynamic clearly lies in the hands of a person who wants to win a certain way, and that way just so happens to be connected to the moral compass, his moral compass, his objectively flawed moral compass, right? Other than that, I ain't really got too much to say about Dave Culley getting fired. Other than, I just want, if you're a person if you're a general sports fan and you don't believe that this is a situation, go look at Jim Caldwell. Go look at what happened to Lovie Smith, who's the current defensive coordinator for the Houston Texans. And honestly, I hope sticks around, because if there was anything that we saw from Dave Culley, the person that started week one, that coach that started week one, got significantly better by the end of week 18. And if you're not a person who's about improvement overall, I don't know what you're looking for in a coach. Like, how many coaches are getting better as the season goes on? And especially in a bad situation. Like, the Texans played better at the end of the season despite having the massive COVID outbreaks and everything like that. They played better at the end of the season than they did at the beginning of the year. And that's most people will want that. Facts are, that's not what the Texans want right now, and that's actually why they fired Dave Culley. There's the article written on ESPN where they talk about how unusual his firing is. There was definitely a conversation about how Dave Culley is not fully on board for everything that the Texans have planned for their future, which is probably, ladies and gents, for those of you who don't believe that the Texans are trying to tank right now, just look at half of the moves that they made this offseason. Just look at them. There's no way that you can make a legitimate argument. And you talk about rebuilds are different than tanks. It's no, rebuilds are literally when you strip down the talent on the team or whatever. When you strip down the talent and you refuse to sign anybody to a long-term contract, that is because you plan to make everybody as malleable and replaceable as possible as the season goes along. Plus, you want to be in a position where you're not giving away draft picks, right? A lot of playoff teams find themselves, especially, you talk about the Rams. The Rams are trying to make themselves into a Super Bowl contender, and they're in the playoffs right now. But are we super confident in the skill level of the Rams to be able to go out there and consistently win 3 games to get to the Super Bowl and win it all? I don't think so. I don't think anybody is. But they've drafted and they've given away every draft pick that they have for the next 5 years, essentially, to try and get talent that's proven in the NFL. But anyway, move on. Best of the best was Dave Culley getting $22 million off of the Houston Texans because they are dysfunctional is the way that I will phrase it. Is the word that I will use to describe the Houston Texans in a reasonable manner. But yeah, shout out to Dave Culley. I know he'd probably still rather be coaching than getting that money for free. Because, if you're most of these guys are addicted to football, in a unhealthy way. So they'd rather be still getting paid and also still be the coach of the team. But hey, he's gonna have those paychecks coming in are gonna be pretty dope for him. Anyway, we take our first hydration break of the show, ladies and gentlemen. I almost clicked on it a little too soon there, but I will pick the song here. By the way, to that company that keeps hitting my videos with copyright claims, this is literally original music made on a beat machine by an artist named Christina Grukis. And actually, I've been hit with 2 or 3 copyright claims, and they've actually been disproven. I've had them removed because I send the report hey, my friend Christina Grukis literally made these songs, and then I link her SoundCloud, which you should go check out and listen to her songs. Let's go not too far behind for the next 3 minutes and 5 seconds on our hydration break. We'll be right back. When we come back, we'll talk about the worst thing that I saw in sports this week right here on the Broke Boys Sports Podcast. What is up, ladies and gentlemen? We're back from our first hydration break. Shout out to everybody who's joining us live on Twitch and on YouTube. I'm Ashton G. Lewis. This is the Brook Boys Sports Podcast. And if you made it this far in the show, don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. At least like the video for sure. Before we get cooking here, making sure that everybody's on the up and up and knows what's about to go down. So we got worst of the worst. We got what we talking money or we talking money. And then we're going to take another hydration break. And when we come back, it's the final segment of the show, What's Poppin', where we just talk about what's poppin' in sports. We move on to the worst thing that I saw in sports today, which, by the way, not today. The worst thing I saw in sports this past week. And if you know anything about me, I watch so many things in sports, so it absolutely has to be horrendous of a thing to happen for it to make worst of the worst. And this one's actually kind of funny. I'm not even gonna lie. Here we go. Vax Novak Djokovic faces deportation again. If you don't know who Novak Djokovic is, he's one of the greatest tennis players of our time and possibly all time when it's all said and done. Dude from Serbia. He actually distinctly during the span of 2020 went out of his way to kind of like throw the middle finger up to the Rona. And after a tournament he held, like illegally or whatever, after a tournament they had like a dance club party, or like it was like a dance club party in a Serbian nightclub or something like that, and like a bunch of dudes had their shirts off and all that kind of jazz. I'm not here, the only objection that I have about that whole situation is being out during a global pandemic and potentially spreading COVID, which is exactly what they did, because like multiple people tested positive after that party was over, which means that they were probably positive in the party in some way, shape, or form and spread it out amongst people. Anyway, the Australian Open, which is the first major of the year, is coming up next week, and Novak Djokovic thought he could mosey on down under and participate in a tournament that I think he's got like 9 of his 20 major titles he's won at the Australian Open, which 9 is the most that any individual person has ever won at the Australian Open. And also it's like half of his majors, which is like on their way to, he's trying to win the most majors ever. And I will say this, I find it intriguing that Novak is an anti-vaxxer, but yeah, he's made it pretty well known that he's not about getting vaccinated and gone out of his way to do so. It's just really weird that like an athlete who is at the top of his game is just like, I'm not about that and I don't give a shit about COVID and potentially spreading it to other people. But this has been a situation that's been going on for a couple of weeks now. Novak showed up and then was immediately detained because they denied his visa upon his arrival, and due to a technicality, I think something where he's using like a religious exemption or something like that he is not required to get vaccinated because it is staunchly against his religion. And then the other thing that goes along with it is that he says that he tested positive for COVID like a certain date that was like 2 weeks or 2 or 3 weeks ago. And then there's also like film, and there's like also like footage of him being out in the world, like amongst people, like at autograph sessions and hanging out and stuff like that during the time period that he said that he was positive for COVID. Which, if you're an anti-vaxxer, like, do you care when you catch COVID? Or are you okay with spreading it to other people? Which, hey, if Novak, one of two things is happening. Novak lied about his positive status, or that's not the way COVID worked in his body and it was different or something like that. He found out retroactively that he was positive for COVID or something like that, or he went out into the world and like intentionally spread COVID because he doesn't think it's that big of a deal and it's okay because he didn't feel bad. He didn't feel bad about doing what he did, and on top of that, he didn't feel bad like sick or anything like that. So, which, all those things are possible. But yeah, the Australian government is officially, as of this morning, revoked his visa for the second time because he got off on like a technicality from a certain judge that did like an expedited like overnight hearing type deal, and he verified his visa. He was clear to go, and then now today, Australia, the government, the immigration minister, I believe is what they orchestrate that position in Australia for, has come out and said that like his visa is revoked again. So he is now for the second time having his visa revoked, and I think he's supposed to report to deportation officers at like 8 a.m. on Saturday because he's going back into the detention center that he initially was put into when he first arrived. And then Sunday there's supposed to be an appeal hearing that hopefully will get his status reinstated for his visa, and he will be able to participate in the Australian Open on Monday. If you do not know why Australia is going out of their way to, I wouldn't even call it harass, going out of their way to enforce a law to prevent somebody who could potentially be dangerous and doesn't take COVID seriously entering their country, it's because they, as a nation, were one of the first countries to really, quote-unquote, eradicate COVID in their nation, opened up their borders, and then, of course, COVID picked back up, all that kind of jazz like that. They've been on multiple lockdowns throughout the span of time that America has done nothing, like, in terms of lockdown or anything like that. And it has been a massive part of their culture to do what is right for the general society. So they've been okay. They haven't been okay with the lockdown. There's never gonna, like, even the people who were okay with the lockdown were not okay with the lockdown, right? Like, it affected them mentally, physically, a lot of other ways as well. I know me personally, that was the worst shape I've ever felt like I've been in about like 7 years, like 10 years or something like that. So, when I was in lockdown, when I couldn't do anything, I was like working out in my backyard, but something was still kind of like really wonky about me in general. Whatever. It was like off. And a lot of other people were struggling with their mental health on a regular basis. I know that for sure. There was a lot of other people struggling with the fact that they were like, oh, I can't just stay inside the house kind of deal. I heard that from like one of my cousins, and I almost laughed on the phone in his face. But nonetheless, Australia, if there was ever a group of people that you would give like an A+ to in terms of fighting COVID in the best manners possible, it would be the Australian people. So for a guy like Novak Djokovic to show up and be like, hey, I'm intentionally not vaccinated and definitely could be if I wanted to be, they definitely are going to go out of their way to make an example, not only of him, but other people who think that they're going to get around the rules and the things that are going to protect their citizens to the peak of their abilities, which, by the way, like, if that happened in America, definitely would be a big supporter of it. If there was somebody who was like basically intentionally flouting the rules, I would be kind of like, oh, I mean, I don't know. There's a very simple solution to your problem, and you're choosing not to take it because you don't want to. Not because you can't, not because you don't feel like it, because you simply do not want to take the simple answer. So now Novak Djokovic is back in a detention center, immigration detention center, for the second time in the same week because he won't take a free vaccine that will help not only him but everybody around him. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes, which is, guess what, a continuing theme, ladies and gentlemen, for We Talking Money or We Talking Money. Yes, I got a scene set up for We Talking Money. The number for We Talking Money or We Talking Money, which is a segment, by the way, where we talk about money, in case you hadn't picked up on it. The number for today is $14,650. Probably some taxes mixed in there or something like that. It is the number of dollars, American dollars, that, not doll hairs, dollars, that Amari Cooper, who is unvaccinated, has been fined by the NFL because they saw him at not only the Dallas Mavericks basketball game courtside, but also at the Cotton Bowl, where Alabama played against Cincinnati before they would advance on to play in the national championship game against Georgia. They fined him for being out in public without a mask on because that is a part of their rules. And, you know, don't feel bad. Never going to feel bad for Amari Cooper in this situation because, once again, the solution to your problem is very simple, and it is readily available for you the second that you want to do it. Shout out to the NFL for, I wouldn't even say being petty about these rules or anything like that, but enforcing these rules, because it's definitely felt like there's been multiple times where it feels like people have been sidestepping the COVID rules, where like the Joey Bosa situation where he like tested positive for COVID and then he was in the COVID-19 protocols and then he was out of it like within 2 days or something like that, and nobody could confirm or deny if he was vaccinated. And based off of some, you know what, I'm not supposed to be in the camp of making assumptions or whatever, because there's a lot of people who don't agree with the vaccine who still got vaccinated. There's a lot of people who are skeptical about the vaccine but got vaccinated. And Amari Cooper, for whatever reason, this late in the game on January 14th, 2022, after more than 1 million people have died worldwide from this disease, has still chosen to be one of the people in America that is not vaccinated, which, by the way, is now the minority because over 60% of people in America are vaccinated against COVID-19. So I would say that it's his personal choice, which I guess it is, but, I guess you're free to make dumb choices all the time. Anyway, he's now paying basically a year of tuition for some people, a car worth of some people, multiple people's. In certain cases, that's like half a year worth of mortgage for some people because he won't take a free vaccine. And hey, play stupid games, win stupid prizes. And especially knowing that he's like a famous football player, he was courtside at the Mavericks game, and I guess he thought that nobody was going to piece together that whole situation. But interesting to find out that Amari Cooper is not vaccinated. I wonder what the reasoning behind that is. And unvaccinated, by the way, I had to look this up. An unvaccinated player can attend sporting events. They just have to be like in a box, like they have to be in a luxury suite, and they can't have more than 10 people in that luxury suite. So, yeah, you can do it. You can do it. Also, you can do it. You just got to make sure you don't end up on camera, which if you are a former Alabama alum that is very successful in the NFL, at some point you have to imagine you're going to be on camera. I don't know how that escaped them. But yeah, this is just another example of the multitude of people who don't want to get vaccinated, but also think that they deserve the ability to be treated as if they're normal people in society when they are not. They are choosing to be a part of the problem. And on that note, ladies and gentlemen, I guess those are two really negative stories. Anyway, when we come back from our hydration break, which will be here in a couple of minutes, we are going to talk about what's popping in sports. Hopefully, there's a lot of stuff popping. I'm kidding, there is. Trust me, I looked ahead, and there's a lot of stuff popping in sports. We're going to talk about the NFL playoffs, break down each one of the games. I'll give you a prediction. We will also talk about we got college football, because I have some questions for Stetson Bennett. Well, I don't have questions for Stetson Bennett. I have questions for us as a society, as a sports fandom, as a sports ecosystem, and the media. I have questions for media members out there who are the tastemakers of the day. So let's do this one. This is 4 Great Thoughts by Christina Gukas. And we're back here live on the Broke Boy Sports Podcast. I'm Ashton G. Lewis, and it is time for our final segment, ladies and gentlemen. Before we head out, it's time for What's Poppin'. You guessed it. We were just talking about what's popping in sports. Anyway, we're just going to take it from the top. We're going to build our way slowly to the NFL playoffs. If you're out there in the chat or if you're out there just in the internet and you're watching this either in the past, present, or the future, as I say always, please like the video. If you're watching from the future, please comment some key information, financial information, the next big wave in terms of money making that I should be investing in. Please don't write NFTs. For the love of God, please do not type NFTs. But anyway, if you are in the future, please help a brother out. Help me understand how I can make my podcast great. Or greater. Greater is probably the best way to phrase that. We're going to start here. Talk about football, college football. The College Football National Championship went down on a Monday. First time in 4 decades, the Georgia Bulldogs were able to pull off a victory versus a team that, quite frankly, the score for that game mattered, right? In the sense that it determined the national champion. But also, if Alabama had won that game, it would have also determined the genetic father of the Georgia Bulldogs and probably irreparably broken a fan base's mental fortitude, like overall or whatever. But luckily, we don't have to talk about that universe. The Georgia Bulldogs were able to pull off a win led by one of the, if not the greatest defenses of all time in terms of college football, and a ton of those dudes are going to get drafted. Some of them are going to wait their turn, but they're eventually going to get drafted. Also led by Dalvin Cook's little brother as well. But, and this is what I said before the break, right? When we talked about questioning the media and people's the choices that people are making and potentially breaking vicious cycles that we've seen happen over and over again in the realm of sports. So, final score in this one gave Georgia the win, right? Bama gets shut down offensively, safe to say. And somehow, some way, we end up having Stetson Bennett, the walk-on quarterback for the Georgia Bulldogs, become the star of the show, the hero of the day, if you will, in some cases. And nobody's really questioning it enough, that is. I listen to some podcasts. I know there's a lot of skepticism a lot more skepticism in the podcast world because things are a little bit looser around here and all this kind of stuff like that. But Stetson Bennett should, if there's an interview sheet of people that we should be talking to, it should be Jacoby Dean at the top of the list, right? And then all the defensive linemen, and then all the corners, and then maybe the backup D lineman, and then maybe Stetson Bennett should be on the list. Actually, Adonai Mitchell, who, by the way, found out is from Houston, H-Town, hold it down. He went to Ridgepoint High School, I actually covered him when he was in high school before he became the behemoth giant that he is now. I just did not know. I think I covered him as freshman year, and then I stopped covering high school sports, so it's really weird. But yeah, shout out to him for going out there and doing his thing in the national championship game, and shout out to the champ. Anyway, that's a big deal. That's a big deal, cultural. Not even, as a sports culture, I feel like the fans reacted the way that they should have. They all got a good laugh out of the Stetson Bennett, which, by the way, shouldn't have been Stetson Bennett. Stetson Bennett on Good Morning America as the quarterback representing Georgia. Shouldn't have been him. Should have been literally anybody who, close your eyes and pick a starter on the defense. Make it that guy. That is going to be on Good Morning America, because quite frankly, if there's anything that you want the general public that's outside the sports realm to take away, it is not the white quarterback who basically rode the coattails of the greatest defense in the history of college football to the national championship game and made a couple of really, really great throws, right? Stetson Bennett is clearly a very good football player in comparison to the weight of what his defense did all season. It is nothing. Because we're supposed to live in a world, we're supposed to play football, right? So it's about the team. The better unit led the way. The better unit shut down the most dominant program in the history of college football. The better unit went out there and shut down the Heisman Trophy winner. The better unit went out there and shut down a wide receiver group that is probably going to have multiple that is going to have multiple first round picks in it. Because they have a defense filled with multiple first round picks in it for the NFL. So why are we talking to Stetson Bennett? Why are we talking to, like, if there was ever a situation in the history of football where the quarterback doesn't matter, it is this situation with the Georgia Bulldogs. This whole season. And somehow, I'm sure Stetson has taken a ton of time out of all the media that he's done to point back and talk about his defense and how amazing they were and what they did for him and how game-changing they were overall throughout the course of the season. I've also seen some quotes that are just out of fucking pocket for a guy who really didn't do that much. For just facts. Just a guy who went out there and most of the time that he spent this season was like, I didn't mess up, so we won the game by 4 touchdowns. And even if he did mess up, it's like, oh no, we won the game by 2 touchdowns. And the other team scored 3 points. That is one thing that's how I indicate, like, that's got to be a massive indicator for us as a society, right? Like when there's blatantly a big giant answer to the question that we're asking when it comes down to it, everybody's supposed to be writing what the prominence of the story is. And it really felt like in a lot of the media interviews, especially on TV, when it was all said and done, we just laid people who have the power to make those choices in terms of like who appears on television, who gets all the big time interviews. They made not even the lazy choice. They made the wrong choice in people to talk to. Stetson Bennett didn't, no offense to him, he's clearly a more talented athlete than I will ever be and ever have been. He's going to be a millionaire when he goes to the draft because there's going to be some team that sees what he did for the Georgia Bulldogs and they see some great talent. And to his credit, Stetson Bennett, we've already talked about this, pretty good football player. He's shown that he's got the ability, especially after, and this is the key indicator too, Stetson Bennett played his best football after the biggest mistake in this game almost happened. And then he started to play at a supremely high level, right? But overall, man, like in the grand scheme of things, if you're trying to tell the story of the national champion this year, you're not going to get it by talking to Stetson Bennett. And I'm really disappointed in a lot of people who, so many people in this game, so many people in the sports industry as a whole are sports fans. And if you're a fan of sports, you should there's never been a point where I'm just like, oh, we should just always talk to the quarterback. I'm always a bit like I've talked about it last year when we talked about that Monday Night Football game where the Bears played the Rams on Monday Night Football. And I was just so elated to see ESPN when they were talking about like forming the narrative about these two teams. They did not waste their time talking about Jared Goff. They did not waste their time talking about that was Mitch Trubisky's last year. They didn't waste their time talking about that and trying to shoehorn it's the two quarterbacks are the best players on this team, and everybody knows they're not. They talked about the two best players out there on the field at any given point, and it was Khalil Mack and Aaron Donald. And clearly that's a huge step forward from where we used to be at, because it used to be default, two quarterbacks, two best players. Those are the guys going on the promo sheets. Those are the guys going on the ads. But this was disappointing. Like for me personally, especially considering that like Stetson Bennett, and I hate to be this guy, but we've already talked about race on this show already. To see the white guy go out there when the defense is filled with black people is just so weird. To me personally, the white guy gets to go out here and come and look like the white knight because he's like 5'8" or whatever. He's like 6 feet tall or whatever it is. Played JUCO ball, scrounged and fought his way to get to the top of the Georgia depth chart at quarterback. And like we said before, Stetson's been a very good football player. But when there are better athletes who contributed more on the field and are the reason that the game was won, and we like as a sports industry ignore that. On the things that people are going to see the most, and that's the TV stuff, right? Because the real sports fans know who won this championship. The real college football fans know who won this championship. And it's just so disheartening to see. And maybe they don't feel that way. Maybe the Georgia Bulldogs defense doesn't feel that they feel like they're getting their just due. But for me personally, I hate to see this corny ass shit. Where it's like, oh man, it's not just a quarterback. It's like the fact, and maybe I'm messed up for the fact that I'm upset that like it's because Stetson Bennett. Like there's a certain part of me that's like at least 2% of this is because Stetson Bennett is white, and the rest of the defense is filled with black men, right? Stetson Bennett's a white guy, and the rest of the defense is full of black men, and all the cameras for some reason are on the white guy, who clearly, like, people talk about this on the internet, right? The audacity of an average white man, and it comes off like Stetson Bennett is fitting into that slot perfectly right now, and it's just disappointing that we, as a media, not we, because I'm not actually a part of the media, I'm not at that level. I don't control what people talk about, but like, it's disappointing to see sports not only follow like into a vicious cycle that has existed forever, and then two, for it to be like so blatantly like, this is just the wrong person to talk to. This is the wrong person to be trying to get information from about how they piece together a championship, when there are so many other people who are far more qualified in this situation. Anyway, also, to all the short guys, let me know if Stetson Bennett is your champion. Is that your king now? Anyway, other stuff. Devin Booker banished the Toronto Raptors mascot, who is named the Raptor, after he forced him to miss a free throw in an empty arena, which actually, if you think about it in the grand scheme of things, is probably like him make. By the way, if you go watch the video, literally the Raptor does when he's on his approach for his shot release, and it makes him miss the free throw. But he says it makes him miss the free throw. I think he just missed the free throw. You know what I mean? It happens. It's an NBA. It's tough. You have to somehow figure out how to play full tilt in the NBA and then drop your heart rate reasonably enough so that you can control the ball at a standstill position and sink a free throw. You can talk about how they're free all you want. They're difficult to make. Open shots are difficult to make sometimes. They're just like, they are slightly less difficult than taking contested shots. Anyway, forced a free throw in an empty arena, which, you know, a lot of people are like, yo, there's literally no one here. If you don't know, Toronto, Canada's taking COVID seriously, so there's not people packing arenas across the country to come and watch basketball at the risk of increasing the spread of COVID for the sake of money. So they have been emptying out. They haven't been playing in an arena, which, by the way, it makes it really difficult for me as a sports photography fan to determine whether or not the Raptors are like at practice or they're playing in games when I look at their team photographers' photos that they take. Anyway, that's like a real thing. Like, when you go look at the photos, there's just nobody in the crowd, and it's been like that for 2 years. Actually, the Raptors couldn't even play in Canada last year because of their COVID restrictions. They were in was it Orlando? I think they were not in Orlando. They were wherever IMG is, I think. So, which I think is Orlando. Whatever. I'll look it up later. I'll circle back. Somebody remind me. Hit me up on Twitter at FB_playbook if you know the answer just off the top of your head or whatever. But they played in Florida last year because they went from the place that had all of the laws to prevent COVID to the place that has none of the laws to prevent any type of crime. So, that happened. And if you think about it in the grand scheme of things, it's like being at a concert and just completely engulfed in the sound. Eventually your ears adjust and reduce the amount of sound that you're hearing to protect your eardrums and stuff like that, and they still get beat up, right? And it's not as deafening, it's not as distracting in terms of like the loudness of the music, and in terms of preventing you from hearing what the music that you're listening to and you're trying to enjoy it and everything like that. Whereas if you're like in an empty room and you hear like a fire alarm buzzer going off in like a completely silent room, it has a far larger impact. Like, it has just as prominent of an impact in terms of like catching your attention. Right? Like, that's like a real thing. By the way, I have a friend who sends me videos of like famous people who apparently need to change their fire alarm batteries because they're walking around their mansion and you can hear like the little fire alarm beep in the background. He loves those videos. Shout out Eric Allen. If you know who he is the reason that this show even exists. So shout out to him. But yeah, I thought it was really funny that people were like, what do you mean? He's like the only person in the arena. How can he be distracting? I was like, he's the most distracting thing in his direct line of sight. He's actually more powerful than he's ever been because the stadium chairs all look the same. They're in an arena. All the stadium seating looks exactly the same. And in Toronto, the seating is black. So it kind of definitely blends together in your eyes, and especially in your periphery vision or in your background vision. When you're focusing on the rim and everything behind it is black or like kind of gray, not not gray, but it's like black, brown, and gray for the concrete to get in and out of the stadium. And then you see something jump up, and it's like a bright red purple with a white jersey and white shorts on, and it like moves around. It definitely takes your attention and your focus off of the rim for like maybe even a 16th of a second, but it's enough to make you miss a free throw, which is the ultimate home field advantage. Also, I demand that the Raptor for the Toronto Raptors get a raise, because that is elite level mascotting. I feel like you should be able to lock up mascot of the year if you're able to go out there and distract an NBA superstar who shoots like 80-something% from the free throw line, and you force him to miss by your presence. That's like mascot of the year, right? Not jumping off of like a 200-foot ladder, which is very impressive. But nonetheless, I think that like if you're the Raptor, you just send that in as your highlight reel. That's got to be like the first thing. It's like, I literally impacted the game. By the way, the Suns still won versus the Raptors. That's your NBA update. Oh, also the Memphis Grizzlies, if you're a gambling person, they are on a covering streak. So check that out. Do your research, kids. Bru McCoy. Anybody? Raise your hand. No one? Okay. Cool. Bru McCoy is currently a USC wide receiver. And how do I put this? He's now in the transfer portal for the third time. So I know this got to be some old men literally fuming right now, losing their absolute shit that Bru McCoy is in the transfer portal for the third time. Started at USC, where he initially signed his letter of commitment, and then Cliff Kingsbury left. Cliff Kingsbury at the time was the offensive coordinator for USC. He left to go to the NFL to coach the Cardinals, who are now in the playoffs. And then let's see. He went to Texas. Then he transferred to Texas via the transfer portal. And now that there is a new coaching staff coming in with Lincoln Riley, he is transferring again after he transferred back to USC. So he went from USC to Texas, back to USC, and now he's transferring again to get out of there. So, yeah, apparently this is also, he did not play a single snap last season in connection to an investigation where Title IX got involved, and they refused to reinstate him afterwards. And then also in the same case, the LA District Attorney refused to file charges against him for what seems to be some sort of domestic violence. He's actually like out on bond for like $50,000 or whatever. And this is interesting. But yeah, they got a new coaching staff, and it doesn't look like Title IX at USC is going to reinstate him. So begs the question of like why Title IX somewhere else would. Right? Like they're all supposed to be using the same information. I guess Title IX at USC is only responsible for what happens within the spans of USC as a campus. And if he goes to another campus, technically he hasn't allegedly abused anyone on that campus. So, yeah. Quandre Diggs, if you saw his horrifying injury that happened when the Seattle Seahawks were able to beat and upset the Arizona Cardinals in the final game of the season, Quandre Diggs he got basically crushed by an offensive lineman, like steamrolled essentially, and it broke his leg because he was trying to go low on a block to make a tackle on a running back, and it broke his leg and I think dislocated his ankle or like fractured his ankle. He apparently is saying that he's feeling a lot better. I'm kidding. He said that he is healing up and he's going to be okay, because a lot of people were really worried. And honestly, Quandre Diggs is like one of the best defensive players for the Seattle Seahawks, and he has looked amazing. He has been amazing basically every year that he's been in the NFL. Also from Texas, Angleton, Texas, if I'm not mistaken. So, yeah, Tyler Lockett, another Seattle Seahawks. Trust me, this is all because they're major stories to me. These are different stories I picked out. Tyler Lockett, wide receiver for the Seattle Seahawks, wore some customized cleats from a man by the name of Marcus Rivero. You should definitely look these up on blackwallstreet.com. They are pretty dope. They say Greenwood on it, which is in reference to a part of Tulsa, Oklahoma, where a part of Tulsa, Oklahoma that was burned down during a race war. Race riot, I guess is the way to describe it. But yeah, Tulsa, Oklahoma, which should be most famous for the Tulsa Massacre that happened a couple decades ago. He wore cleats in remembrance of the 3 remaining survivors, people who were still alive from the Tulsa Massacre all those years ago. And a lot of people if you don't, okay, so I guess we should go into like what the Tulsa Massacre is. Back in Tulsa, Oklahoma, a long time ago, a lot of black people moved to Tulsa, Oklahoma because Oklahoma is relatively unfounded in terms of like people expanding out there, and there was space for black people. If there's one thing that has been true about black people for a long time, they have been looking for a place that they can truly call their own. And we live in a time now where like there's places like Houston, Atlanta, there's places like Chicago and LA and stuff like Atlanta, of course, like the black Hollywood of America, right? And that has played a big role. There have been a lot of black people who have sought places to make them their own Atlanta. Like there was the mass immigration of people from the South to the West and all that kind of stuff like that. Black people from the South to the West, and black people's expansion in Texas and everything like that. But yeah, overall, the Tulsa Massacre is the epitome of a terrorist attack. Long ago, black people in Tulsa, Oklahoma were more successful than they had probably ever been in the modern time in America. And while the black people in Tulsa, Oklahoma were succeeding greatly by owning their own businesses, how they ran their businesses, of course, kind of self-governing to a certain degree as well, the white side of town essentially was in ruins because they were like rural farmers and were not very successful in terms of like they basically everything that they did depended upon like how successful their crops were growing, and the business that they saw with the black side of town, Greenwood, they saw that the black people had like basically surpassed them in terms of wealth. And so naturally the reaction of those people from Oklahoma was like, we need to kill all of them. So they did. Like the cops and the government basically condoned white people going to the black side of town, burning it to the ground, and not giving a shit about the people who got caught, who were alive in the buildings. They also killed a shit ton of people, just like with guns and pitchforks and shit like that. And by the way, Tyler Lockett wore the shoes in honor of the people who survived the massacre because he himself is from Tulsa, Oklahoma. I would also like to point out, this has happened multiple times throughout U.S. history. The Tulsa Massacre is just one of many examples of when it has happened. Check out Jonestown, I guess. There's a movie made about Jonestown. But recently, the Tulsa Massacre, I think it was referenced in The Watchmen. I haven't watched that one. I haven't watched The Watchmen yet. Not the movie. The show that was on HBO that apparently is not getting renewed, which is understandable. That show was too good to have a second season that was just as good. But other times it's been referenced heavily is in Lovecraft Country. If you haven't seen that show, it is an amalgamation of H.P. Lovecraft's novels that he wrote. The funny part about it is, I guess this is like the ultimate middle finger. H.P. Lovecraft was a massive racist, and the entire Lovecraft Country books, the show itself is about basically features successful black people within like the realm of H.P. Lovecraft's story, and it retells a bunch of other wild shit that happened or whatever. But you should definitely watch it. It was amazing. My girlfriend, who hates like kind of scary stuff that's like sci-fi type stuff, loved this show because of how it depicted black people, which was amazing for me as well, because a lot of people don't see that aspect of black people that you see in Lovecraft Country. Also, they had multiple episodes where they were able to go to the moments before and during the Tulsa Massacre for a certain reason, and you should check out that entire show. It ties into something and is actually really prominent and really important for a lot of black history, because so many times when people talk about black history, they don't talk about why those people who did all these amazing things are not around anymore. But yeah, anyway, other stuff. What were we talking about? Oh yeah, no, it's time. It's time. That was my last story that I had. Other than the Memphis Grizzlies apparently are the best team in the NBA. Let's talk about the playoffs, shall we, ladies and gents? Oh yeah, it's here. Super wild card weekend. Sorry. So do not forget, there is Saturday, Sunday, and Monday football for playoffs. The Monday games will be on ESPN. So if you don't have cable, either, make some friends this weekend who do, or go to a bar, or if you need the illegal links, find those. Do what you got to do. NFLreddit.com. Anyway, NFLbright.com. Anyway, the Tennessee Titans they are the number 1 seed overall in the AFC. They do have a bye, and there has also been footage that has proven a lot of people's worst nightmare to be true, and that is Derrick Henry is back in practice, which can only mean good things for the Titans and bad news for everybody else. We'll see how that shakes out, as they will not be playing this weekend, but next week, depending upon who wins. Is it Buffalo versus New England? So, yeah. The playoffs are, like, stacked in the AFC. It is absurd. Actually, whoever wins, since I have the map pulled up. I don't know why I'm asking these questions. But yeah, like the playoffs in the AFC are ridiculous. Like every single team in the AFC is like ridiculously good. And they're just in the situations that they're in because of their inconsistency at times. And I think that inconsistency is related to the quality of the other teams that they've been playing. But we'll talk about that later. We'll talk about the Titans when we get a chance to talk about the Titans, when we know who they're playing. The Chiefs are playing the Pittsburgh Steelers. There have already been multiple memes going around where inviting you to the party of the decade, Ben Roethlisberger's retirement party, which a lot of people think is going to be this game versus the Chiefs. Which, quite frankly, I'm about it. I'm taking the Chiefs on this one, ladies and gents, mainly because I believe in the pressure that the Chiefs can generate versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. I also believe that the Kansas City Chiefs have the offense that is going to be powerful enough to be able to actually move the ball versus the Steelers, which has been difficult for pretty much every team that they've played so far this year. They're going to have to do it without Clyde Edwards-Helaire. It was announced right before we went live on the show that Clyde Edwards-Helaire is not going to be playing. He tried to test his foot out today. He tried to test his leg out today for his injury, and it just didn't go for him. Luckily for the Chiefs, they've actually been able to find They've actually been able to rotate some people in and out, like Gore, number 40 Gore, who's actually on special teams and in the running back rotation or whatever, which I always find to be absurd. Just because, like, a guy can score a rushing touchdown and then has to go out there for kickoff and make something, has to, like, run full speed for kickoff. I find that hilarious. But, yeah, that's a real situation for the Chiefs. And also, we talk about, like, who's more clutch. I know Ben Roethlisberger technically did take the, I think he's got the, most game-winning drives since he was drafted, which was like 20 years ago. And I say like 20 years ago because it was 20 years ago. But yeah, the Kansas City Chiefs, I think, have a massive advantage in key positions on the field, and also with a mobile quarterback like Patrick Mahomes, a guy who clearly is the master of improvisation. I think he has a huge advantage over the Steelers defense, which, by the way, the Steelers defense is always on point. So I'm interested to see if they can even generate turnovers versus this Kansas City Chiefs offense. But I'm banking on the Chiefs to come out here and win this game. Moving on, number 3. This is the 3 seed versus the 6 seed. That's the Buffalo Bills taking on the New England Patriots. It has been a wild ride for both of these teams to get to this point, because the New England Patriots, if you want to talk about one of the teams that careened into the playoffs, like a controlled crash for a plane that is like steadily losing altitude, it was definitely the Patriots. They did not look impressive in the back half of this season, and mainly they played the Buffalo Bills, I think, twice within like 4 weeks or 3 weeks or something like that, and both times, their second time versus, that's a different team I was thinking about. But their second time playing the Buffalo Bills, they just got dismantled. And it was due to the fact that the Buffalo Bills have been doing that thing that they've done all season, which is where they play, like, sometimes they play like the number 1 offense in the NFL, and then sometimes they play like the 18th or 19th best offense in the NFL, which is an interesting conversation to be had. I will start off this breakdown with the weirdest fact. The Buffalo Bills have nobody on their injury report. Like 0 people on the injury report. I don't even think they had everybody 100% participation in practice the last time they had practice. But a strange place to be. Good place to be for the playoffs, but kind of seems a little sketchy to a certain degree. I don't know. Maybe I'm just a guy talking into a microphone when I say something. But that is off-putting to a certain degree, that people, 100% of their team is healthy. Off-putting. Anyway, the Buffalo Bills versus the New England Patriots in this one. So We talk about the quarterback matchup, Mac Jones versus Josh Allen. There have been, because of the run game effect, because of the effectiveness of the New England Patriots run game, we've seen multiple times that the game versus the Bills can kind of be taken out of Mac Jones' hands. I would also like to point out that this is like the fifth time the Patriots have played a divisional opponent in the playoffs without being the division champion, and apparently they're like 2-2 in both of those matchups. Whatever that means, it literally means nothing. It's just like a random thing to say that's very weird, specific stat. But the Buffalo Bills, I like to point out, they basically were like one play away from winning that game in the snowstorm. Like they got hustled a little bit in terms of like time or whatever, but they were like a couple plays away from, I would say one play, because it's like one big pass play that set up the Patriots to get downfield or whatever, and Mac Jones being able to complete, I think it was 2 passes or 5 passes, being able to do that successfully versus the Bills offense that basically shut down in that game, and they were just one touchdown away from being able to win it all, win that whole thing, and they could have swept the Patriots, but there will not be weather adversity in this game. So any game that hasn't had them play in a blizzard, the Bills have been able to win pretty handedly. And we're talking about, of course, like the tactical mastermind. Do you go out there and you run plays that are your shit? Like things that are like the things that you do the absolute best this season in terms of reads for Josh Allen, in terms of routes run for Stephon Diggs and Emmanuel Sanders, routes run for Dawson Knox. Do you go out there and do your thing, or do you customize a game plan for the Patriots? And of course, the answer is going to be they do a mix of both to a certain degree, but I think there's going to be a lot more of letting the Buffalo Bills go out there and run their plays, because this is the third time that these two teams have played. This is the third time these two teams have played each other this season, which I'm starting to realize as these I realized just off the first batch of these playoff spots that happening in the playoffs is going to skyrocket. It usually doesn't happen. There's like a huge article that was written, I want to say like 2 or 3 years ago, about the number of times you face an opponent 3 times in a single season, and since it can only be 3 teams in the NFL, and there was only one wild card spot or whatever. There was only one wild card spot. The likelihood of one of those wild card teams being your divisional opponent were so slim. And then on top of that, the divisional opponent would have to do so well in your division that you guys would be both like pretty high. Like they would have to play a wild card seed. They would have to play a high seed. And then they would, if they were good enough, they would beat that high seed, the number 2 seed in the situation. And then they would be on the opposite side of the tournament bracket within the AFC than you, because they would take the track of the 2 seed. So you wouldn't play your divisional opponent a third time very often, because they would have to win. They would have to meet you in the AFC Championship game. They would have to meet you in the AFC Championship game, or you'd have to be lower than the number 1 seed in the playoffs. And it just doesn't happen as often. And that's why the data on how you face an opponent in the wild card round or whatever, or how many times you faced your opponent in the wild card round, doesn't really have any definitive evidence. It's a numbers nerd thing. It's a numbers thing or whatever. It's actually really interesting because it doesn't happen as often. So there's no definitive how most teams don't sweep their divisional opponents regardless of how the quality of those teams throughout the course of a season. So that's a little interesting. I'm going with the Buffalo Bills to win this one though. I wouldn't be surprised if the Patriots pull this one off. 1, because they're the Patriots, but 2, this seems like one of these games is going to be a massive upset. That's how the NFL works. That's just the situation it's going to be, and that's how it's going to go down. But the Patriots also had 13 people listed on the injury report. One of those people is Isaiah Wynn, who's been pretty good for them at left tackle. So that not great versus the Bills, who have been pretty damn good when it comes to generating pressure. Moving on to our next matchup, the Cincinnati Bengals take on the Las Vegas Raiders. And this one, I don't even really feel like I need to say it. I get it. My thing is, like, the Raiders got a chance to play a divisional opponent in the back half of the season, and especially an inconsistent divisional opponent that has a glaring weakness, and that was in their rush defense, and that was versus the Chargers. And I know everybody's probably hyped up on them or whatever, but I'm riding with the Bengals on this one. The Bengals have been far more consistent than the Raiders. By the way, this is the rematch from something that happened earlier in the season. The first time they played each other, the first half was kind of even, and then the second half, Joe Mixon kicked the shit out of the Raiders defense overall. And I'm banking on the Bengals. I'm banking on Joe Burrow to actually have a good passing game this time around, because there was a lot of times in that first time that they played each other where Joe Burrow kind of had like a decent passing game overall, but for the most part that was carried by Joe Mixon for them to beat the Raiders. T. Higgins is apparently hurt and is the biggest potential person to miss this game. That would be interesting if he did. Also, T. Higgins, one of the nastiest route runners in the game. I believe the Bengals offense is too overpowering for the Raiders defense. And lest we forget, the Bengals actually have a high quality defense across the board, in particular when it comes to like stopping the run and generating pressure. So I'm about it. I'm riding with the Bengals on that one. I feel like they're going to go out there and win that one pretty comfortably. Actually, you know what? The Bengals have been doing this thing where they play close and then separate late kind of deal, or they get down early and then come back late. That's pretty much what their whole season's been about. I feel like they're going to go out here and win this one handedly. I feel it. Feel this one. Rematch between those two teams. Moving on to the NFC, we got the Packers who are the number 1 seed and they got the bye. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers are taking on the Eagles, and man, this is easily the most difficult game for me to pick. Other than Rams Cardinals, this one is the most difficult game for me to pick in this game. I really, really want to pick the upset for the Eagles. One, because I'm stupid and I like the Eagles, but also I feel like the Buccaneers, like I've said before, I can't put my finger on it, but like the fact that the NFC South looks so bad. Every other team except the Buccaneers look pretty bad, even though the Saints almost made the playoffs. I say that knowing that was the case. Basically, like they needed like one more win to go there when they would be a playoff team. But it makes me feel like it feels super suspect. Like the Buccaneers, there's something about them this year that feels so weird. Like, and maybe it's because I'm lingering on what happened with the Buffalo Bills and what happened with the Jets way too much. And there's been other times where they've had to come back this season too. Like they struggled against the Panthers earlier this year. And that's a divisional opponent. So I don't really hold that against them as much as I would those two other games. And there's a couple other games I could point out, but those are the two most prominent ones this season. And of course the Jets one was most prominent because of the Antonio Brown situation. But man, my sketch meter on both of these teams is really, really high. The Eagles, of course, they've been sketchy all season, right? They've gotten big points from everybody, and they should, for their head coach changing the way that he plays football completely from the first 6 games of the season, changing the way that they play football to a run-based offense that sets up Jalen Hurts for success. We've seen Jalen Hurts go out there and do it, and the other thing about that is now the Buccaneers are going to be at full strength. They're going to be at 100% strength, and they're going to be close to that elite-level run defense that we saw earlier this season. And a lot of teams have been kind of avoiding running the ball against the Buccaneers because of how good they are at it. But I think the Eagles can make it happen. Man, it's so hard for me to sit here and say this, knowing that this is two of the better defenses that are in the playoffs overall. But the Buccaneers run defense versus a heavily run-centric Eagles team means that somebody's got to step up. Means that somebody's got to go out there and do their thing. And this is the biggest problem for me is the secondary for the Eagles is probably their biggest weakness so far, and the Buccaneers wide receiver core is so good. There's so many reasons to not think that the Eagles can win this game. And I guess I'm gonna chalk this up to faith in Jalen Hurts, faith in their ability to figure out how to run the ball successfully, and most importantly, my faith in chaos. My faith and belief and staunchly in that chaos is an element that you can never account for. And it makes no sense when it strikes, and it makes no sense afterwards either. I'm going with the Eagles to upset the Buccaneers in the first round. Like I said, both of these teams sketch me out a lot when I've watched them, especially considering the Buccaneers have an immense amount of talent and they do not play like it at times. And I think a lot of teams in the NFL can say that. But the Buccaneers and how easy the NFC South was for them this season, despite the fact that they got shut out in a game 9-0. It has me very, very concerned. And that's why I'm leaning towards the upset. The Dallas Cowboys take on the San Francisco 49ers. I see other people have been trying to pick this as an upset. I disagree heavily on that. The 49ers are a team that I've seen Jimmy G look like one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. I've seen Jimmy G look like a mid-level quarterback in the NFL. I've seen Jimmy G look like one of the worst quarterbacks in the NFL. But I'm banking on, and this is going to be an interesting matchup because it's going to be Trayvon Diggs versus Deebo Samuels. And like we've mentioned before, I think I mentioned this already, Trayvon Diggs has surrendered the most receiving yards in the NFL for a cornerback this season. The pressure for the Dallas Cowboys is speculated to be some of the best that is going to be available in the playoffs, and a lot of it is skewed numbers-wise because of the injuries that they had across the defensive line, in particular, DeMarcus Lawrence, of course. Micah Parsons has come on and looked amazing. I hate to say it, man. I got faith in the Cowboys to come pull this one out. This should be a great matchup between two really high-level defenses, and the fact that I'm interested to see how the run defense looks in this one. I have faith that Dak Prescott is going to be able to pull this one out. I got faith in him. I really do. I've always been a believer in Dak Prescott, but this is one of those moments where the San Francisco 49ers have everything going for them. And you could allegedly say that they match up really, really well, position by position. Like wide receiver-wise, Brandon Ayuk. Juwan Jennings has been coming on really, really well late in the season. Combine that with Deebo Samuels, who's like a top 5 wide receiver in the NFL. Across from those guys matched up with Deebo Samuels, Amari Cooper in terms of talent, right? Amari Cooper, Deebo Samuels, and Donovan Wilson. Talk about the cornerback situation, all that kind of stuff. Across the board, defensively, the 49ers versus the Cowboys defense, like almost, in my mind, almost relatively even. And that's really weird to say because the San Francisco 49ers are the 6th seed because of how good the NFC West is. But, I'm not feeling the upset on the Cowboys, man. I feel like the Cowboys are going to go out here and they're going to take care of business. And I say take care of business, but I expect this to be a relatively low-scoring game because of the way that the 49ers play defense up front. And the pressure situation is going to be interesting. Dak reacts better under pressure than Jimmy Garoppolo does, but how consistent will the pressure be for the Cowboys and how consistent will it be for the 49ers? Because the 49ers looked amazing versus the Rams in terms of like generating pressure, and Andrew Whitworth is one of the best offensive linemen in the NFL. So see how Tyron Smith holds up. The Rams are taking on the Arizona Cardinals, and like I said earlier, on last week's pod, or earlier this week in the podcast, I was on Tuesday for the NFL breakdown, and I'm gonna say it again this week. This is the most interesting game for the playoffs this entire weekend for me. Not only because I guess you could say I'm a fan of the NFC West. I love the teams and how they are all very different from each other, yet somehow are perfect for dismantling each other's success on a regular basis. And case in point, the Seattle Seahawks, a team that really had nothing to play for, went out there and they mollywopped the shit out of the Cardinals on the final game of the season. But yeah, the Rams taking on the Arizona Cardinals, and it makes me, man, it is so hard to figure out which team is going to show up here. By the way, DeAndre Hopkins not playing makes it look like it is going to be an easy night for the Rams, and that's why I'm picking them. I have faith in the Rams' ability to run the ball because the Arizona Cardinals defenses looked so suspect. They looked amazing at the midpoint of the season, and they've progressively gotten back to that point because now they were generating turnovers versus the Seahawks, but the Seahawks were like kind of coughing them. The Seahawks have been giving the ball up all season. Let's just be for real. But yeah, that's my biggest takeaway from this whole situation is, damn, man, it is hard to pick the Cardinals when you know what their offense looks like because they do not have DeAndre Hopkins, who, when things are going absolutely wrong, he is always the right answer. AJ Green has kind of filled that role a little bit, but they're asking AJ Green to fill his role and DeAndre Hopkins' role. I'm going with the Rams, man. This should be an interesting matchup. I'll be surprised if this doesn't turn out being like this comes down to a field goal. This comes down to like a final drive because I can guarantee you Matthew Stafford's going to turn the ball over in this game in some way, shape, or form because not only is he playing against a team that knows him really well, but he's also Matthew Stafford, and he seems to be in a real bad spot in terms of seeing the same thing that his wide receivers are seeing. So I'm going to go with the Rams, having faith that they're going to be able to overcome turnovers throughout the course of this game. Guaranteed, in my mind, I'm mentally going in thinking they're going to turn the ball over, and I feel like the defense that I've seen from the Rams can overcome that. Only time will tell, ladies and gentlemen. And on that note, I have no more show left for you. I'm sorry to say, it is time to pack it up, and it's time for you to go home. You ain't got to go. You ain't got to get. You ain't got to go home. You just got to get the hell out of here. Other than that, if you want to find me on Twitter at FB_playbook, on Instagram at TheAshtonForever. You can also find me on TikTok at TheAshtonForever as well. And make sure you stay safe this weekend. Remember, Omicron is significantly more infectious than any variant we've come across so far. So if you hanging out with people, make sure they're people that you know. That if you are vaccinated, make sure you hang out with other vaccinated people. You take care of your people. Be smart. Make smart decisions. And if you're drinking, make sure you mix in the water a little bit. Other than that, stay hydrated. Naturally, just stay hydrated. If you're in Houston, do not break out the bubble coats. It is not that cold. And on that note, ladies and gentlemen, go home, Roger.